When historians describe Tartarian architecture, they usually focus on the ornate facades, the impossible construction timelines, and the mysterious demolitions. But the real story, the one that barely appears in architectural studies, the one that even today sits buried in engineering reports and suppressed photography collections, began with something that defies not just history, but physics itself. It started with buildings that float. In 1897, a survey team in St. Petersburg, Russia, conducted precision measurements of the city's oldest structures. Their task was routine: establish elevation baselines for a new sewer system. What they found was not routine. 17 buildings in the oldest district showed zero foundation pressure on the soil beneath them. Zero. The instruments weren't malfunctioning. The team repeated the measurements dozens of times. They brought in additional equipment. They consulted with engineers from Moscow. The results were always the same. These buildings, some weighing thousands of tons, were not pressing down on the earth. They were floating. And when the survey team tried to publish their findings, their report was confiscated. Their instruments were seized. Their careers were destroyed. One team member kept a private copy of the measurements. His grandson still has it. And those measurements don't just challenge our understanding of architecture. They challenge our understanding of gravity itself. They challenge our understanding of what the Earth actually is. The floating buildings of St. Petersburg weren't unique. Once the survey data leaked into underground research circles, investigators began looking for similar anomalies elsewhere. They found them. In Venice, Italy, buildings that have stood for centuries in waterlogged soil show weight distribution patterns that structural engineers cannot explain. The foundations should have sunk. They should have cracked. They should have failed. They haven't. In San Francisco, structures that survived the 1906 earthquake showed seismic readings that suggested they weren't fully connected to the ground. They swayed differently. They absorbed force differently, as if they were partially decoupled from the earth beneath them. In Prague, medieval towers that should have collapsed under their own weight centuries ago continue to stand. Engineering analyses conducted in the 1970s concluded that unknown support mechanisms must be operating. In Mexico City, pre-Columbian structures built on unstable lakebed soil maintain perfect level despite the surrounding terrain sinking by meters. The official explanation is superior ancient engineering. But superior engineering doesn't make buildings float. Something else does. The weight measurements are the key. Modern engineering understands how buildings transfer weight to the ground. It's basic physics. Mass times gravity equals force. That force presses down through foundations, into soil. Every building should exert measurable pressure proportional to its mass. The Tartarian structures don't. The 1897 St. Petersburg survey measured 17 buildings. Each showed pressure readings between 60% and 85% lower than their calculated mass would require. A building weighing 10,000 tons should exert 10,000 tons of pressure on its foundation. These buildings were exerting 1,500 to 4,000 tons. Where was the rest of the weight going? The survey team proposed 3 hypotheses in their suppressed report. 1. The buildings contained unknown lightweight materials that reduced their mass. But material analysis showed standard stone, brick, and iron. Nothing unusual. 2. The measurement equipment was systematically flawed, but the same equipment measured other buildings correctly. Only the oldest structures showed the anomaly. 3. The buildings were partially supported by forces other than the ground beneath them. Forces other than the ground. The team didn't speculate on what those forces might be, but we can. The flat Earth model provides an explanation that the globe model cannot. On a globe Earth, gravity is theorized as a force pulling all mass toward the center. Objects press down because they're being pulled down. But if the Earth is flat, gravity as we understand it doesn't exist. What we experience as gravity would be something else entirely. Density and buoyancy, electromagnetic effects, the natural tendency of denser materials to sink below less dense materials. In this model, a building doesn't press down, because it's being pulled down. It sinks or floats based on its relationship to the medium around it. And if Tartarian builders understood this, if they knew how to manipulate the forces that actually govern our world, they could construct buildings that partially float, not through anti-gravity technology, through proper understanding of how the flat Earth actually works. The globe model can't explain floating buildings. The flat Earth model can. The architectural evidence extends beyond weight measurements. Tartarian buildings share distinctive features that make no sense in conventional architecture, but make perfect sense if the buildings were designed to float. The spires. Tartarian structures are famous for their elaborate spires and towers. Architectural historians describe these as decorative, aesthetic choices reflecting cultural values. But the spires are almost always made of specific metals: copper, brass, sometimes gold plating over iron cores. These metals are conductive, and they're always pointed upward. In a flat Earth model with an electromagnetic dome above, these spires would function as connectors, antenna systems linking the buildings to the energy field that permeates the firmament. The buildings aren't just sitting on the ground, they're plugged into the sky. The domes tell the same story. Tartarian architecture is famous for domes, massive domes. Domes that shouldn't be structurally possible with the materials and techniques supposedly available. The dome of St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg weighs approximately 3,000 tons. It sits atop columns that engineering analysis says cannot support that weight through conventional compression. Yet it stands. The dome of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. weighs 4,000 tons. The iron framework supporting it was supposedly constructed in the 1860s with Civil War-era technology. Yet it stands. The dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome weighs over 5,000 tons. It has stood for 5 centuries without the steel reinforcement that modern engineers say would be required. Yet it stands. These domes aren't just architectural features, they're resonance chambers. In a flat Earth model, the dome shape would interact with the electromagnetic properties of the firmament. The geometry would create standing waves. The building would vibrate at frequencies that partially counteract downward force. The domes don't just look impressive, they make the buildings float. The windows provide additional evidence. Tartarian buildings feature enormous windows, far larger than practical for heating or lighting in pre-electric eras. Architectural historians explain these as status symbols. Wealthy patrons demonstrating they could afford the glass and the heat loss. But the windows aren't just large, they're positioned at specific intervals. Analysis of Tartarian facades shows window spacing that corresponds to harmonic ratios, musical intervals, the same mathematics that governs sound and resonance. If the buildings were designed to vibrate, to resonate with external energy fields, the windows would function as nodes, points where the standing waves interact with the external environment. The windows aren't decorative, they're functional, part of the system that allows the buildings to float. Before we go deeper into these, findings, before we analyze the construction techniques, the energy systems, the suppressed measurements, and the deeper questions about what the flat Earth model reveals about Tartarian technology, if you're interested in these kinds of investigations, make sure you're subscribed. It helps support the research and lets me continue these long-form deep dives. Thank you. Now, as we move into the next section, we'll examine what Tartarian builders actually knew about the nature of our world, and why that knowledge was suppressed along with their architecture. The flat Earth wasn't hidden from humanity by accident. It was hidden because understanding the flat Earth means understanding technologies that the current power structure cannot allow. Free energy, levitation, resonance systems that tap into the electromagnetic dome above us. Tartarian builders had this knowledge. Their floating buildings prove it, and when the Tartarians were eliminated, their knowledge was eliminated too, replaced by a globe model that makes these technologies seem impossible, a globe model that keeps humanity dependent on fossil fuels, conventional construction, and physics that limit rather than liberate. The energy systems of Tartarian buildings reveal the connection most clearly. Many Tartarian structures featured elaborate rooftop apparatus. Spires, yes, but also more complex equipment. rotating elements, wire arrays, metallic spheres. The official narrative calls these weather vanes, lightning rods, or decorative finials. But photographs from the late 1800s show equipment far more complex than weather vanes. In photographs of the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, buildings display rooftop apparatus that resembles nothing from conventional architectural history. Coiled wires, rotating drums, antenna arrays. These photographs were taken before the demolition of the fair, before the buildings were destroyed and the evidence erased. The apparatus wasn't decorative, it was functional, drawing energy from the electromagnetic dome of the flat Earth, powering the systems that made the buildings float. The electromagnetic dome is the key to understanding all of this. In the flat Earth model, the sky isn't empty space extending infinitely. It's a solid structure, a firmament, an electromagnetic boundary that encloses our world. This firmament isn't just a barrier, it's an energy source. The dome generates and contains electromagnetic fields that cover the entire flat Earth. These fields interact with conductive materials on the surface. Tartarian builders understood this. They constructed buildings with conductive spires that reached toward the firmament. They built domes that created resonance with the dome above. They installed window systems at harmonic intervals to tune their structures to the frequencies of the electromagnetic field. And the result was buildings that partially floated. Not magic, not anti-gravity, not impossible physics, just proper understanding of how the flat Earth actually works. The modern suppression of this knowledge serves a purpose. If people understood that the Earth is flat, if they understood that the firmament is an energy source, everything would change. Free energy would be available to everyone. Buildings could be constructed that require no traditional foundations. Transportation could be developed that doesn't need fossil fuels. The entire economic system based on scarcity would collapse. This is why the globe model is enforced. This is why Tartarian architecture was demolished. This is why the floating buildings were suppressed. Not because the truth is unbelievable, because the truth is too powerful. The water evidence supports the flat Earth interpretation. One of the strongest proofs that the Earth is flat is the behavior of water. Water always finds its level. It doesn't curve. It doesn't wrap around a sphere. Over large distances, this becomes measurable. Bodies of water should show curvature if the Earth were a globe. They don't. The Bedford level experiment of 1838 demonstrated this. Samuel Robotham measured a 6-mile stretch of canal and found no curvature whatsoever. If the Earth were a globe with the dimensions we're told, there should have been approximately 24 feet of curvature over that distance. There was none. Water is flat because the Earth is flat. And Tartarian builders understood this. Their floating buildings work because they were designed for a flat Earth. On a globe, the physics wouldn't function. On a flat plane with an electromagnetic dome, they function perfectly. The engineering impossibilities of Tartarian architecture make sense in the flat Earth model. Consider the construction timelines. We're told that the Chicago World's Fair, 200 buildings covering 600 acres, was constructed in 2 years, with 1890s technology. On a globe Earth with conventional physics, this is nearly impossible. The logistics of materials, labor, and engineering would require far longer. But on a flat Earth, with access to electromagnetic energy from the firmament, construction becomes different. Materials could be moved with partial levitation. Foundations could be minimal because buildings would partially float. Power would be abundant and free. The impossible construction timelines of Tartarian buildings become possible when you understand the flat Earth context. They built so fast because they had technologies we've been made to forget. Technologies that only work on a flat Earth. The destruction of Tartarian buildings follows a clear pattern. The World's Fair buildings were demolished within months of the fair's closing. The Tartarian structures of San Francisco were destroyed in the 1906 earthquake, an event that some researchers believe was artificially triggered. The great buildings of Chicago were burned in 1871. Boston's Tartarian district was burned in 1872. City after city, fire after fire, demolition after demolition. The pattern isn't coincidence, it's erasure. The buildings had to be destroyed because they were evidence of floating architecture, evidence of electromagnetic energy systems, evidence of the flat Earth. As long as the buildings stood, someone might figure out how they worked. Someone might rediscover the truth about our world. The buildings had to go. And they did. Almost all of them. The survivors reveal what was lost. A few Tartarian structures remain standing. The controllers couldn't demolish everything without raising too many questions. St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the Vatican complexes in Rome, certain government buildings in Washington, D.C. These structures have been retrofitted over the decades, their rooftop apparatus removed, their energy systems disabled, their floating capabilities reduced, but the architecture remains. And careful analysis still reveals the original design intent. The conductive spires, even when truncated, still show their original metallic composition. The domes, even when reinforced with modern materials, still display their resonance geometries. The window spacing, even when some windows have been filled in, still shows the harmonic intervals. The buildings remember what they were designed to do, even if we've been made to forget. The physics professors won't discuss this. Bring floating buildings to an academic physicist and watch the dismissal. Impossible. Violates basic physics. Conspiracy theory nonsense, but the dismissal is itself revealing. They won't engage with the measurements. They won't analyze the survey data. They won't examine the weight distribution anomalies. They just dismiss, because engaging would require questioning the globe model. And questioning the globe model is not permitted in academic physics. Careers are destroyed. Funding is revoked. Publications are rejected. The enforcement mechanism is social, not scientific. You can't prove the globe with physics, but you can enforce it with career destruction. The flat Earth map explains the distribution of Tartarian architecture. On a flat Earth map, an azimuthal equidistant projection with the North Pole at the center, the distribution of Tartarian buildings forms a pattern. They're concentrated in the inner regions of the flat Earth, closer to the center, where the electromagnetic field from the dome is strongest. Fewer Tartarian structures appear in the outer regions, toward the ice wall that surrounds the flat Earth. The builders went where the energy was. They constructed their floating buildings, where the connection to the firmament was most powerful. The geographic distribution only makes sense on a flat Earth. On a globe, there's no reason for the pattern. On a flat plane, with varying electromagnetic field strength, the pattern is logical. The great Tartarian buildings were power stations. This is the conclusion that ties everything together. The cathedrals, the Capitol buildings, the grand exhibition halls. They weren't just beautiful, they were functional. They drew energy from the electromagnetic dome above. They partially floated to reduce structural stress. They distributed power to surrounding areas through resonance systems. The buildings we've been told were churches were actually power plants. The buildings we've been told were government offices were actually energy distribution centers. The buildings we've been told were exhibition halls were actually demonstrations of flat Earth technology. All of it hidden in plain sight. All of it misinterpreted by historians who didn't understand, or weren't allowed to understand, what they were looking at. The stars visible at night support this interpretation. On the globe model, stars are distant suns, nuclear furnaces trillions of miles away. On the flat Earth model, stars are something else entirely. They're lights embedded in or projected onto the firmament. They're part of the electromagnetic dome that covers the flat Earth. They're not distant, they're close. And they interact with structures on the surface that are designed to receive their energy. The spires of Tartarian buildings point at the stars, not randomly, specifically. Analysis of spire orientations shows alignments with specific star positions. The buildings weren't just connected to the dome in general. They were connected to specific points in the dome, drawing energy from specific sources. This is why the spire orientations vary from building to building. Each was tuned to a different star. Each was drawing from a different point in the firmament, a network of energy collectors scattered across the flat Earth, harvesting power from the dome above. The sun and moon in the flat Earth model are local. They're not millions of miles away. They're thousands of miles away, or closer. They travel in circuits above the flat Earth, illuminating different regions at different times. This explains time zones without requiring a spinning globe. This explains seasons without requiring an orbital tilt. And this explains something about Tartarian architecture that the globe model cannot. The buildings were oriented to track the sun, not for warmth or light, for energy. The sun in the flat Earth model isn't just a light source, it's an electromagnetic object. It interacts with conductive materials. Tartarian builders oriented their structures to maximize this interaction. The solar alignments found in ancient and Tartarian architecture aren't spiritual. They're practical. Engineering decisions for energy harvesting on a flat Earth. The moon reveals even more. The moon in the flat Earth model generates its own light. It doesn't reflect sunlight. It produces illumination, independently. This is observable. Moonlight has different properties than sunlight. It doesn't heat objects the same way. It affects materials differently. And Tartarian buildings show evidence of moon-oriented design. Certain structures feature reflective surfaces oriented not toward the sun, but toward the moon's path. Certain metallic elements are positioned to receive moonlight, not sunlight. Certain chambers within Tartarian buildings are designed to be illuminated only by moonlight at specific times. On the globe model, this makes no sense. Why orient buildings toward reflected light? On the flat Earth model, it makes perfect sense. The moon is an independent energy source, and Tartarian builders harvested it. The ice wall that surrounds the flat Earth explains the limits of Tartarian expansion. In the flat Earth model, Antarctica isn't a continent at the bottom of a globe. It's a wall of ice that surrounds the flat Earth, containing the oceans and defining the boundary of our world. Beyond the ice wall, we don't know what exists. Expeditions are prevented, information is suppressed. But within the ice wall, the flat Earth supports life, energy, and civilization. Tartarian architecture appears throughout the known world, but not beyond. No Tartarian structures have been documented in Antarctica. No floating buildings, no conductive spires, no resonance domes, because the builders knew the boundary. They knew where the electromagnetic dome was strongest. They knew where their technology would work, and they built within those limits. The modern space program is part of the deception. If the Earth is flat, if the firmament is a dome, then space travel as we're told it exists is impossible. You can't fly rockets to the moon if the moon is a light in a dome thousands of miles away. You can't orbit a flat plane. You can't land on a nearby electromagnetic object. The space program is theatre. The moon landings were staged. The satellite systems are balloons and ground-based networks. The International Space Station footage is filmed in pools and aircraft, all to maintain the globe illusion, all to prevent people from understanding what Tartarian builders knew. The Earth is flat, the firmament is real, and technology existed, that can tap into it. The Bible describes the flat Earth. Genesis describes the firmament, a solid dome separating the waters above from the waters below. The Hebrew word is rakia, something beaten out, like a metal bowl. Every ancient culture described the Earth as flat with a dome above. The globe model came later. It was promoted by interests who wanted to separate humanity from the truth. Tartarian builders preserved the ancient knowledge. They built according to the actual nature of our world. And when they were destroyed, that knowledge was nearly lost. But the buildings remain. The measurements remain. The evidence remains. The rediscovery is beginning. The Flat Earth movement has grown exponentially in recent years. People are questioning the globe. People are researching the firmament. People are examining Tartarian architecture with new eyes. The floating buildings are being documented. The energy systems are being studied. The connections are being made. The controllers suppressed this knowledge for centuries, but the internet made suppression harder. The truth is spreading, and once enough people understand, once the critical mass is reached, the entire structure of lies will collapse. The globe model will fall. The flat Earth will be acknowledged, and Tartarian technology will be rediscovered. The implications are staggering. If the Earth is flat, if floating buildings are possible, if the firmament is an energy source, then everything we've been told is wrong. Physics is wrong. Astronomy is wrong. History is wrong. The entire framework through which we understand our world is a constructed lie. And the purpose of that lie is control. Keep people believing in a globe, and they'll never discover flat Earth energy. Keep people believing in conventional physics, and they'll never build floating structures. Keep people believing in scarcity, and they'll never demand abundance. The lie serves the controllers. The truth would set humanity free. This is why Tartarian buildings were demolished. This is why the flat Earth is mocked. This is why the measurements are suppressed. Freedom is too dangerous to allow. The floating buildings prove it all. 17 structures in St. Petersburg that don't press down on the Earth. Buildings across Europe and America with impossible weight distributions. Architecture that only makes sense on a flat Earth with an electromagnetic dome. The evidence exists. The measurements exist. The buildings, what remains of them, still stand. And they testify to a truth that we were never supposed to discover. The Earth is flat. The firmament is real. The Tartarians knew. And they built wonders that we're only beginning to understand. This concludes the documentary, but the investigation has only just begun. Floating buildings that defy the globe model. Electromagnetic domes that power ancient architecture. A flat Earth that explains what the globe cannot. Something out of place. Something out of time. The Tartarians are gone. Their knowledge nearly lost. But the buildings remember. The measurements survive. The truth waits for those willing to see it. The Earth is flat. The evidence is architectural. And once you understand, you cannot un-understand. Welcome to the real world. The flat one. The curvature proof. The math destroys the globe model completely. We're told the Earth is a sphere with a circumference of approximately 24,901 miles. If this were true, the surface would curve away from any observer at a predictable rate. The formula is simple. 8 inches per mile squared. Over 1 mile, the drop would be 8 inches. Over 10 miles, the drop would be 66 feet. Over 20 miles, the drop would be 266 feet. But this curvature is never observed. Lighthouses are visible from distances that should be impossible on a globe. City skylines can be seen from across lakes that should curve them out of view. The Bedford Level experiment. The Chicago skyline from Michigan. Again and again, observations contradict the predicted curvature. The globe model fails. The flat Earth model matches what we actually observe. Tartarian builders designed for the flat Earth that actually exists. Their floating buildings prove they understood our world's true nature. The awakening. Every day, more people question the globe. Every day, more researchers examine Tartarian evidence. Every day, the truth spreads despite censorship. The controllers are losing their grip. The floating buildings stand as witnesses. The flat Earth waits to be acknowledged. And when it is, when the final veil falls, everything changes. Free energy becomes possible. Floating architecture becomes achievable. The Tartarians showed us what's possible. Their buildings are the proof. The truth survived. And now, it's spreading. This documentary presents alternative interpretations of architectural evidence and cosmological models for educational discussion. The claims regarding flat Earth theory and Tartarian architecture represent perspectives outside mainstream scientific consensus. Further research and critical thinking are encouraged.